All righty. So again, welcome. Feel free to throw your introductions in the chat. Today, we're going to do a little project background before we get into the 3 draft designs, and then we'll move to a short Q&A. We'll do group discussions in breakout rooms, and then we'll wrap up and do some next steps. So we're super excited to hear your thoughts on these draft designs today. We want to understand, what do you think about what's included, where, how, the proportions of things, what might be missing. And we want to emphasize that these are drafts. There's still a lot to be decided. The next round of design, after we've summarized all or collected all the community input on these drafts, we're not gonna choose one of the 3 drafts. Really want to emphasize that is not what we're doing. We are choosing elements of the 3 drafts to combine and adjust and tweak based on this community input to then create one preferred draft. So I'm going to go to Mark, the city's project manager, Mark Cosmos, to give us a little background on this project.
Thank you, Allie. Mark Cosmos, landscape architect with the City of Eugene, Parks Planning. And I'm just going to walk you through a brief history of the site, just get us oriented, and also just let everybody know that our website has a lot of this information on it, should you miss something or want to look into it in more detail. So our site is bound here in the blue dashed lines. That's our project limits, and this is, oh, thank you. My cursor wasn't doing that. The site is 223 acres in size and located in Northwest Eugene. To the north of the site is Clear Lake Road. On the right-hand side, you can see Highway 99 and a portion of the Beltline. The site itself, actually the core of the site, the pond area, was formerly owned by Lane County and used for gravel mining in order to construct the Beltline in the late 60s. And so the ponds that are there are what's left over. And the site also contains an A2 channel, which is a stormwater facility that takes some of the stormwater from town and conveys it and filters that throughout the site. Most of the site is managed agriculturally currently. Next slide, please. So what most people think of when they think of Golden Gardens Park right now is the portion that has been developed as a natural area. So if you take a look at that large image, there are a series of ponds on the site, and they are managed by our parks system as a natural area, which just has to do with how the site is managed versus a developed park. But if you look in the other photographs, which take a view to the west or north or east, you'll see that agricultural component. So the rest of the land that we have for the site, the balance of that 223 acres is managed agriculturally currently. And so that's the area that we're looking at for our design. Now, in 2006, you can leave it on the previous slide, actually, please. In 2006, there were some short-term improvements funded by the city, and they mainly had to do with safety, access, and pond enhancements. So this went from a gravel pond, which had very steep banks, to a pond that was a lot safer on the edges. Those banks were laid back. Native plantings were introduced. On the lower right-hand picture, you can see the bridge over the A2 channel that was put in so that both emergency vehicles and people had access to the site because previously there was no way to cross that channel and move to the north. Next slide. And then also in 2006, some long-term planning was done with the public. So this included public outreach. And at the time, it was a smaller site, but you can still see that footprint here. And the community basically said, there are things that we'd like to do to activate the site. And those things included athletic facilities, athletic fields, multiple fields. You can see that on this image, BMX track, dog park, parking, and a neighborhood park. So that's 2006. And since that time, we have added 170 acres to the site. So everything to the left of what's shown in this early planning study is new acreage. And something else happened as well. And that is in 2016, we conducted a feasibility study. Next slide. Actually, two feasibility studies, which basically took some of that early planning and started doing the detailed analysis and confirmation. So this is a company that that understands all the intricacies of what it means to have a multiple field complex and how that functions and how we get people to the site, and are there major roads like Highway 99 and Beltline that get you there. And basically what we understood from the report and the primary recommendations of the report were that we develop 6 and 10 fields, so 6 rectangular fields and 10 diamond fields. And this site was identified as being able to accommodate that spatially as well as contextually within the city and our position within the greater region of the Willamette Valley. So the site is appropriate. Next slide. And of course, we know that since the developed areas were put in, the Western pond turtle enhancements came about, and thanks due to both our city ecologists and Oregon's Fish and Wildlife Department, that the Western pond turtle made a comeback here. And those conservation efforts are just a wonderful example of how we can create this wonderful habitat. And we don't want to forget that as we're designing and planning for the park. We just want everybody to be aware that that's a big piece of this. And the other part of our project history is our system plan. So in 2018, we really looked at all of Eugene, not just Golden Gardens, and said, where are there areas that are underserved? For example, by neighborhood parks. And the Bethel area does not have, and this area specifically, does not have a neighborhood park for the people in this part of Bethel. The Bethel area in general does not have the kind of amenities that this Golden Gardens Park, this sports complex and natural area and neighborhood park can provide to this part of the city. So this report did say we really want to prioritize this as a project. So with that, we're going to move into looking at some designs, and all the designs are really going to balance the 3 main spaces that we're talking about today. And they are the sports complex, the natural area and trails and habitat, and the neighborhood park. And with that, I'm just going to turn it back over to Allie and have her walk us through these first draft designs.
Thank you, Mark. And first, I just wanted to remind folks introduce folks who may be unfamiliar where we are with this process. We started in the fall with stakeholder interviews, interviewing a dozen or so community members representing a variety of interests and in the park. And that led into a public meeting and survey that we did in the winter in January. So thanks for those who are coming back who may be engaged with us then. We took all that input from stakeholder interviews, the public meeting and survey, as well as a park advisory group that has been meeting over the course of this process to develop the 3 concepts that you're going to see more of today. And so now we are here in the spring with public meeting and survey number 2. We're also doing some focus groups with different interests, including sports groups and ecology and ecological advocates. And then we're going to do some pop-up neighborhood events as well over the next couple weeks before we go to the preferred concept phase, where we'll come back to folks for more input before we finalize the plan. So quickly, here's generally who we've talked to so far. I'm just going to skim over this for time and where we are now and what's to come. In the first phase, we showed folks this. We had decided, we had some knowns about the park that were decided. That was the main access was going to be from Clear Lake Road with a possible secondary access point from Terry Street, as that road is planned to be extended in the future. And then neighborhood park and neighborhood park access in the southeast corner, bottom right of your screen. And then we had a lot of unknowns that we were wanting to get folks' input on. So, what kind of specific sports facilities, what specific neighborhood park features. We knew there was going to be some kind of buffer around the habitat area, but we needed to work on what that could look like. And we also wanted to include conservation area enhancements, access roads, paths, layout, all that kind of stuff. So that's what's going forward in this process now. And again, this is what we heard generally from folks in that first phase. So we heard these were the items that rose to the top for our for folks' needs and desires for the park from those different input methods. So we heard that folks want habitat area with conservation and conservation enhancement, with buffers around that, and more vegetation and benches. For sports facilities, we heard that folks want enough fields that could be used for tournament play with grass or potentially artificial turf, with lights, with central food space, meeting and changing areas, and sufficient parking. We heard that folks want a neighborhood park with amenities that would suit different ages and group sizes, and a lawn area. We heard folks wanted more trails and paths and bathrooms, and also rising to the top, equitable access across demographics and transportation modes. In terms of concerns we heard from those different input methods, here's what rose to the top again. Folks concerned about the loss of the existing park experience, concerns around the wildlife and environmental impacts from habitat loss, more human activity, and chemical inputs, impacts to neighbors from noise, lights, and traffic, potential undesirable use such as litter, off-leash dogs, overnight parking, that sort of thing. Maintenance costs, those are all concerns. So taking those top concerns and top needs and desires, that's how we created the 3 drafts that you're about to see. That all went into that.
Allie, can I interrupt you for a minute?
You sure can.
Thank you. This is a little new and different for us. And, if we were in a public meeting, our atmosphere would, of course, be very different. And I would just like to ask that people are respectful of each other. Some want to hear this and some don't. But we would like to give the floor to the people who are speaking and giving our presentation. And maybe if you can hold off on some of your comments and sidebar conversations, it distracts from what we're trying to do here, which is help give everybody the correct context and bearing and information. And we have a good opportunity to do that. So if I can just ask for respect from the audience, thank you.
Thanks, Mark. And part of this phase is coming back to the community and checking, did we hear folks, and moving forward with the input that we've gotten, and also collecting more input to move forward. So here are the 3 draft designs, Azul, Verde, and Amarillo. And you might be asking, why are they named that? We are translating all of our materials into Spanish. Easier to just use one name. These are blue, green, and yellow, 3 colors. We also didn't want any kind of false hierarchy that could be insinuated with numbers or letters. And we didn't want to bias people's impressions or preferences based on that. We have seen that folks tend to choose the first design or the first numbered or lettered design. So wanted to avoid that. These designs that you're about to see more of all share some key similarities. They all have the same buffers around the natural resources and between the field lighting and housing. I'm going to talk about that a little more in a second. They all have vegetation, stream, and ecological enhancements. They all have that neighborhood park with a playground and a lawn. And they all have sports facilities on both sides of the park with diamond fields, 6 rectangle fields, 2 concessions buildings, multi-sport courts, and a playground. And they also all have vehicle parking that aligns with the expected sports facility use. Let's see, so here we have more around the buffers and setbacks. Want to note that the current park has about 60 acres of managed natural area, and that includes the ponds, the channel, and the trails. You could increase that to 70 acres if you included this southeast corner that is planned for the neighborhood park. And the park has about 140 acres or so of agricultural surrounding ag land. And the draft designs, the 3 draft concepts, the managed natural area increases. The managed natural area and open space increases to, at minimum, about 112 acres. Some of the designs have more of that. And that's open space that's connected and uninterrupted by recreation facilities, parking lots, or roads. The buffers that I want to highlight are the buffer A that you see here is around the pond habitat. That's variable. It was developed in partnership with the city's ecologist and an environmental consultant, Biohabitats. Both A and B were actually. The variable pond buffer habitat protects the critical habitat for the pond turtle, the western pond turtle. That's more on the western side of the ponds. That's that 500 feet. And then in some places it is 200 feet for other habitat, including bird nesting trees, other existing vegetation and species, other species. And then we've got a 75-foot buffer around the large cottonwood stands. And then this isn't shown on the map, but you'll see in every draft concept, there's consistent areas of uninterrupted open space that are designed to protect areas where the water table is higher that would be better potential habitat. There's also a setbacks or buffers around the channel to the south and the property that borders residentially zoned, that's adjacent to residentially zoned property on the 3 sides of the park here. And you'll see C and D, those are both legally required, whereas A and B are not by city code. The 3 designs also share some similar sports facilities. So they all have 2 full-size baseball fields, 4 or more full-size softball fields. They all have 6 full-size rectangle fields that can be used for soccer, football, ultimate frisbee, lacrosse. Those are designed for sport and field size flexibility. And they also all have a multi-purpose court that could fit, if it was used for a single sport, up to 16 pickleball courts, 4 full basketball courts, 4 tennis courts, 2 futsal or 1 roller hockey court. This would be set up for 1 or 2 fields or 1 or 2 sports, excuse me, to start most likely. But then that setup could change over the years or decades as demand evolves for different sports. That still remains to be seen in the next phase, how that might be set up. In terms of vehicle access and parking, again, the draft designs all share the same access points. They share that northern road to get to the parking lots coming from Clear Lake. And those parking lots, vehicle parking lots and spaces are driven by expected use of the sports fields, which comes from that feasibility study that Mark mentioned, as well as more recent data from a sports complex in Medford. Ranges from 700 to 900 parking spaces, depending on the sports facility in the specific concept. So that brings us to key differences between these draft concepts. So starting in no particular order, starting with Azul, we have, I'm going to go through all 3 of them and break down their key differences that we're seeing. You might be seeing different ones, but we'd love to hear more about that soon. But here are the key differences that we're seeing in terms of ecological, sports, and neighborhood park. For Azul, while all 3 concepts have some kind of interpretive, educational, interactive feature, that is on the South Pond in Azul. This one has about 114 acres of natural area. For sports, this one has the most dedicated diamonds, has diamonds on the west and north sides. It has more multi-purpose rectangles over here on the east side. And it has a dog park in the neighborhood park, as well as half-court basketball and exercise equipment in that neighborhood park area. In Verde, we have the interpretive area on the main pond. This one has about 112 acres of natural area, more or less. The sports key differences, we've got a multi-purpose field over here on the west side that can be used for diamond and rectangle sports. I'll show an example of that in a second. This one has the most possible rectangle fields because of that multi-purpose field. The dog park in this one, all the concepts have a dog park, and the dog park in this one is on the west side, closer to these fields. The neighborhood park has a pump track, an informal paved event space for smaller events, and it has nature play, which I'll explain in a second. But first, this is an example of what that multi-purpose field might look like. This is from Willamma Lane, and the one in the design, the Verde design, would be almost twice the size. It could fit about 2 full-size soccer fields or 4 softball fields with a bit more room between the home plate and backstop. And this was in our sports focus group. This was something that folks really liked and appreciated. And nature play, you might be asking, what does that mean? We're talking about, here's an example from Rockridge Park in Bend. And it's really just a play area that uses more natural materials like wood and boulders versus bright colored plastics that we'd have in, or metals that we might have in a more typical playground setting, which was also included in these designs. In Amarillo, the last concept, we have the interpretive area more on the northwestern part of the ponds, which is where a lot of conservation habitat work has happened. So that could interact more with explaining to folks about that work. This one has the most natural area, about 128 acres. It has some stream enhancements around the neighborhood park area. And for sports differences, we've got rectangle fields in the dog park on the west. We want to note we think the rectangle fields would probably get more year-round use compared to the diamond fields. This one has fewer diamond fields. The neighborhood park has sand volleyball, nature play again, and no new footbridge between the neighborhood park and the sports facilities over here on the east side or the right side of your screen, whereas the other two do have a footbridge over that channel. Okay, so to summarize, again, this is what we're seeing as the key differences. If this is helpful for you, would love to hear what folks think as we get into breakout rooms later. But if you are here because you're passionate about the open space and potential conservation land, you can see that Azul and Verde have less and Amarillo has more. If you're here because you're passionate about the sports facilities, you might want to look at the top 2 rows for diamond fields or the middle 2 rows for rectangle fields in terms of where those are located or the different number of fields. We've got a dog park in different locations, and then we've got different features in the neighborhood park in each of the concepts. All right, I am gonna pass us to Julie for some general Q&A. We'll take a few quick questions before we go to group discussions.
Yeah, I'm gonna share some questions in the chat that I think would be really helpful to talk through. One is the lack of public restrooms near the child's play area, and I know we've talked about that. The spot is going to be used all year round, and an idea that would be really helpful to parents. So yeah, Ellie, just thoughts around why it wasn't included, or could it be included?
Sure, and Mark or Carolyn, I know you all have been thinking a lot about that in terms of restrooms in the neighborhood park. Mark? Like might be having some
Sorry,
there we
no,
go.
I'm here. Yes. Our neighborhood parks do not typically have restrooms. They are meant to serve a neighborhood and people within about a half-mile walking distance. Whereas the rest of the park, the sports complex component of the park, that is meant to serve a wider, larger group. And so as a larger park, those are the ones that we do think about having restroom facilities in, so that people, when they're going and visiting and spending a good amount of time there, have that as a resource. So, but in neighborhood parks, we generally do not do that. There may be some older parks in our system that have that you might be able to point to and say, oh, we did it 30 years ago and it's still there. But we don't do that today.
All right. And also recognizing, that these are the thoughts from folks in the meeting, and that's a thoughtful response and a consideration. Another really good question is, what are the criteria in deciding the amount of space between the natural area and in the various designs? Was there a minimum? And is this based on data from other parks? Concerns about light and noise in the natural areas. So we're kind of talking about what those buffers.
Yeah, I can answer that. My name is Zach. I'm a landscape architect with the consultant team, Cameron McCarthy. So the buffers, as we currently showed them, there was a diagram that was shown that is pulling from work that we've done with our subconsultant, biohabitats. And that's collected from a combination of published research data, past guidelines from ODFW, and work with the city's ecologists as well. So we put together a roughly 500 foot minimum buffer around the pond turtle habitat, as well as riparian buffers of 200 to 240 feet, depending on whether they're the channel or along the ponds. And those are intended to be in excess of what the majority of published work suggests is the minimum. And there was a question on lighting, and that is something that we are diving in more detail on in the next, when we come back with a preferred concept. But we are looking at that specifically, lighting and noise, as important elements to mitigate. So there'll be more to come on that in specific detail.
Excellent. And I'm going to just take a few more, and then we're going to do breakouts. There's also going to be opportunity to ask these questions in the breakout rooms. But two things, just contiguous soft bark path. What are the options for incorporating something like that? There's a sense that it's not there. And just the idea that people fish in the ponds, how will that continue? That balance of trying to keep, turtles reproducing and also support recreation in the ponds. How does that work in terms of how people use it?
Thanks, Julie. I think I can maybe handle the bark trail one, and then we can address the fishing and turtle question. But I think we have heard from a lot of folks that a continuous bark trail or some kind of trail or path would be desired at the park. So I think that's something that we're taking into the next phase, and really appreciate that input. And then, yeah, there are folks that use the area for fishing, and that is kind of coming into conflict with the existing turtle habitat. I don't know if Lori wants to speak to that, or Carolyn wants to speak to how we might address that going forward in terms of different uses there.
Yeah, it's fishing, and then somebody else mentioned paddling. So yeah, these are
Water
really
access
good about how it's going to be used.
I'm happy to speak regarding the turtles and other wildlife conflicts in the park. We have a lot of wildlife in the current natural area, which is centered around that aquatic habitat and the surrounding, immediately surrounding slopes and the trees. And so this is a balance. We are trying to balance the uses. And that includes casual walking on trails. It includes, not really wanting to bring people into those critical habitats. And so we don't want paddlers in this pond. It's not big enough to support paddlers and, not impact turtles in particular, but also other waterfowl. The fishing is not going to go away. We're not going to prohibit that. But that is problematic for species like turtles. So, we didn't want to have a lot of features that are bringing more people into those areas. So we are trying to find the right balance with all these, less active recreational features as well. I don't know if that answers the questions that are coming up.
Yeah, I think it's really helpful. And again, this is in the concept phase. So, and we're talking about uses after it's built. So really appreciate the questions. We're going to head to breakout groups for about 10 minutes and then come back together as a large group. And so what's going to happen is suddenly you're going to be in a group with about 5, 6, 7 folks, have about a 10-minute conversation, ability to ask some more questions, and then we'll be zapped back. So
in our breakout rooms, thank you, Julie, for pulling us back, and apologies to everyone who may have been interrupted mid thought. But I think we've got some great feedback. Again, thank you all so much for engaging with us today. In just a few minutes left, I want to ask facilitators to share anything that was coming up in your discussion, key insights, main takeaways, what you're hearing, and feel free to share that in the chat too if we don't get to you. But I'll go ahead and start with my group that our breakout group had Charlie, Shanna, and Beck in it. Thank you all so much. Some things that were coming up were restrooms. We talked about I heard some pros and cons of restrooms in the neighborhood park area, some desire for that continuous trail and, protecting the natural space. And then we spent a little while talking about the RV parking and wanting a host on site if that was going to happen to enforce park rules and then but that potentially being useful for folks traveling through Eugene or going to the site for tournaments to raise revenue.
Excellent. And I just want to make sure as new facilitators add in to what you've heard. I think Allie mentioned several things, but does someone else want to jump in?
Anything new?
Yeah, and quick. Like I'm gonna get people out before their lunchtime ends. So we've got 5 minutes.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Victor.
hey, for my group, we talked about the layout of fields, specifically the rectangle fields, and looking at the different sizing for 7v7 and 9v9's youth, the dimensions of those.
And for my group, we also talked about the restroom in the neighborhood park and a clarification that this isn't just a restroom for a neighborhood park, but for a bike path that connects a large part of the city. So it gets more usage than an average neighborhood park. We also talked about public safety and how that will be impacted with these changes, and just a lot of love for this park as it currently is, and wanting to see that beautiful, safe, and thrive.
And I will add that our group talked about effects of wildlife, especially lighting and migratory wildlife, so beyond just the turtles themselves. and a little bit about the quality of existing fields within the systems of Eugene, Springfield, et cetera, that can't be played on year round. And then a concern about, and also a little bit of support of if we can do this right and in a smart growth way, that's great, but there's a little skepticism about whether or not we can really protect all of the migratory and other species that are out there. The biggest takeaway I actually heard, and I don't want to leave it off, is that the ponds are currently used by a lot of our city's marginalized groups or BIPOC groups. And the feeling that those groups right now have that as a resource, and when you bring in a sports component and a different kind of public in there, it's going to feel different. Thank you.
I can go next. I just want to underline, safety is a really important component, but also transparency with the ecological groups that we've worked with on the design side of things. It would be great to have that be reflected on the website. Some positives: the neighborhood park seemed like a wonderful idea for some. Add more trees, add more soft paths, and make sure that you're doing the most to serve the wildlife and protect the wildlife. Thank you. Oh wait, one more thing. There's a bow hunter hunting fish with a bow. That's crazy.
Thank you, Alexis. I think we'll go ahead and wrap up there. I'm seeing folks saying, oh, this feels short and we wish we had more time to talk. And I know we could talk for a long time about this. So again, thank you all for engaging with us on your lunch hour. I see. Just wanted to, again, let folks know that, we know you might need some time to digest all of this, and we really want your input through the survey. I think that link has been put in the chat a few times. It's on the Engage Eugene website, which is also in the chat. Please share your input with us through that survey. And you may see us over the coming weeks gathering more input at kind of pop-up events in the Bethel neighborhood. So stay tuned, and thank you so much. Appreciate everyone's time today.
Share the survey with everyone.
Thanks, Julie.
Very important. Thank you all. Appreciate it.